Hi folks, the purpose of this brief mini lecture is to orient you to the definition of a thesis statement, to discuss what a thesis statement cannot be, and also what I want to do here in addition is to explain how you can qualify a thesis statement so that it doesn't come across as your own direct personal opinion in your paper and look like that what you're doing is taking a stance on the issue, a personal stance. So we're also going to discuss what a qualifier is. So what is a thesis statement? Well, as an unqualified statement, it comes across as an arguable statement and personal opinion. So in other words, it comes across as a personal stance on a topic. For instance, if I were to write global warming is real as one of the sentences in my paper, then my reader would think that I, Ken Harmon, believe that global warming is real, and that's taking a stance on that topic. And since my purpose is only to inform and educate my reader and not take a stance, but show them all the possibilities, then I can't really do that. So what I'm going to have to do is qualify that statement. And we'll talk about some ways that you can do that in just a little while. But just keep in mind that a thesis statement must, without that qualification, come across as an arguable statement and personal opinion. It's also a complete sentence, and this is also really, really important to keep in mind. It has to be a complete sentence with a subject and a verb. It has to be a complete thought, and you also need to provide your own slant on a given topic. And what I mean by your own slant is a new way of looking at this topic. So in other words, it's not necessarily going to be your direct personal opinion, but you're going to provide us with your unique way of viewing this particular topic, and perhaps a way that no one else has shown us before. Your topic also needs to be narrowed down to something very specific. As we've been discussing in class, you don't want your topic to be too broad. Like for instance, economic inequities, that's a huge broad area, but if you can narrow it down to something more specific, that's what you want to do. In addition, something like health inequality. One of the examples that I mentioned in class today to another student was that the United States has the largest infant mortality rate among the large industrialized countries. And so you might ask yourself, well, why is that? And if you do investigation, what you might find is, for one of the reasons, is that, among those large industrialized countries, the United States is pretty much one of the only that doesn't have a national healthcare system. So in the other countries, healthcare is always available to anyone who wants it, while in the United States it's a matter of who can afford it. So that might be a way that you can be very, very specific about that particular topic of health inequity. And it might also be a way that people aren't really, a way of looking at that topic that people aren't really familiar with, and that's kind of what you want to do. You don't want to already tell people what they know necessarily. You want to educate them about things that they don't know and perhaps should know. And of course, a thesis statement provides the direction for your entire paper. And as I mentioned in the previous lectures, the thesis typically comes in the intro, and what that entire intro is going to do is pretty much set up the expectation for your reader of what your entire paper is going to be about. So that thesis is very important. Every idea that you mention in your body of your paper must somehow be connected to that one sentence in the intro, that thesis statement. Every example you provide, every piece of evidence that you show us, everything in the body has to be connected back to the thesis statement in some way. So the thesis is going to be the most important sentence in your entire essay. So when you write your thesis and you're developing it, one of the things you want to keep in mind is your purpose and your audience. Well, first of all, we're seeking to educate and inform only, and that's going to affect how we can structure our thesis, and because we're not attempting to really argue our own point of view in any way. So because of this, we're trying to show the information in an unbiased way, and this is obviously going to affect how we write our thesis. We're going to have to do something called qualify our statement. Qualifiers attribute the idea to a general group of individuals and not a specific person. They also suggest possibilities and not absolute truth. In other words, you don't ever want to go as a researcher into the completion of some research assuming that you already have all the answers to everything and you know everything about everything, because in that case, if you're going into it with that attitude, you're never really going to learn anything at all. So go into it with an open mind and listen carefully and read carefully what each of these individuals you find has to say, because they all have their own unique viewpoint to offer you. And what you want to do is decide, what you think is important enough to share with your reader. But we have to do this in a journalistic way, in which we're not, as the writer, taking a stance ourselves. So we have to qualify statements. For instance, this could be a thesis statement of a research paper. The tremendous rate of incarceration of young black males is a result of social inequity and racial profiling. However, if I have that particular sentence in my own paper, then it looks like Ken Harmon believes that blah, 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 that whole statement there. And that would come across as my own direct personal opinion, and I can't really do that. The purpose of my paper is to educate only. So what I'm going to have to do is qualify this statement. And now how can I do that? Well, I can use a qualifying statement like this one. Many social scientists suggest that the tremendous rate of incarceration of young black males is a result of social inequity and racial profiling. So what's different about these two statements? Well, the difference is that qualifying statement at the beginning attributes this idea, this position, to a general group of people, rather than me, the writer, as an individual. And this allows me to remain unbiased and presents the information in a way that I'm not really taking a stance as the writer myself. So how do we qualify a thesis? Well, first of all, qualification provides and suggests probability and possibility instead of absolute truth or certainty. So some other qualifiers are: many experts believe, scientists hypothesize, studies suggest that, some believe, and many find. And often use words like the word I just used: often, possibly, maybe, suggest, it may be the case that, those types of things. So if you go back to that earlier example that I gave you of global warming is real, then if I take that statement of personal opinion, or what would appear to be personal opinion, and a personal stance on an issue, and I throw one of these qualifiers in front of it, then I would have this: many experts believe global warming is real. Scientists hypothesize that global warming is real. Studies suggest that global warming is real. Some believe global warming is real. Many find global warming to be real. So the difference is, all of these statements allow me as the writer to present the information to educate my reader in a way that my reader never really knows what I, the writer, really personally and individually believe. What we're doing is we're just presenting the information to our reader that we've found in our research, and we're allowing them to decide what they think is true and what might not be true. We're not telling them what to think, in other words, and we're not doing so in a biased manner by taking a personal stance directly on this topic. So when writing a thesis, you need to keep a few things in mind. A thesis has two parts, first of all. You have the topic, and that's your main idea that you plan to discuss in your essay. And then there's your slant. That's that more narrow aspect that is going to sort of provide your own unique way of looking at the information. So let's provide an example here and talk about it. So maybe our topic that we want to write about is college life. Now, this isn't necessarily something you could do for this paper that we're doing, because we're doing social injustice, but this is just a general example. So let's say I want to write a paper about college life, and my own unique slant might be that college life is a difficult transition. Many college students deal with this, and it was a difficult transition for me too. So I could provide my own unique way of looking at this topic by discussing how it's a difficult transition. However, if I just have that one sentence, college life is a difficult transition, in my paper, that I'm taking a personal stance on the topic, that lets me know that I do have a thesis. But if I'm going to avoid argument and only inform, then I have to add the qualifier. Many college students find college life is a difficult transition. And then in that case, it's not necessarily coming across as my own personal opinion as the writer, and instead it's coming across as the personal opinion and experience of a larger group of people who are completely unknown to, at this point, to my audience that I'm writing to. So what can a thesis statement not be? First of all, a thesis is never a question. I often see this in student papers, so keep in mind that a thesis is never a question. If it were, it'd be called a thesis question, and it's not. It's called a thesis statement. So be sure that you're never doing this. Now, we've talked about research questions. You can have a research question, but your answer to your research question, that is your thesis statement. So just keep that in mind. Can also not be an announcement of purpose. In other words, you can't say, in this paper I'm going to show you blah blah blah. In other words, instead of telling someone you're going to do something, just do it. So a thesis is never a question, it's the answer to the question, and it's not an announcement of purpose. It's also not simply a topic. So college life, that phrase college life only by itself, is not a thesis statement. It's not a statement at all. It's really just a sentence fragment. So you have to have a complete sentence and a complete thought in order to have a thesis statement. It's also not a fact. It's going to be your own unique slant on certain facts about a topic, not just the fact itself. So let's look at some example thesis statements, and let's try to decide together whether you think they're good ones or poor ones. So can this be a good thesis statement? What causes violence in children? Well, if you go back to the examples I just gave you, no, it can't be, because a thesis statement is a statement, not a question. Now, the answer to this question, however, could be a thesis statement. The purpose of my paper is to identify the causes of violence. Is this a good example of a good thesis, or is this a poor thesis statement? This is also a poor example. It announces what it's going to do rather than just showing the main idea. The education system in the United States. Is this a good example or a bad one? Obviously, this is also a bad one. It's not even a sentence at all. It's not a complete thought. It's really more like the presentation of a topic. Teen pregnancy can be reduced with good education, parental support, and birth control. Good or bad? Right. This one is good. It reflects a particular slant on the topic, and this is what we want. However, we would still need to go through and qualify this one, because if I wrote this by itself exactly the way it is here, it would come across as my own personal view, and we don't want to do that. What we could do is say something like, many studies suggest that teen pregnancy can be reduced with good education, parental support, and birth control. What about this one? I would like to discuss how teachers and students can develop better relationships. Good or bad thesis statement? Another example of a poor thesis. This one announces its purpose. And let's take a look at this one. Good or bad? I had squash, tomatoes, and corn in my garden last year. Obviously, this one's poor also. It's a statement of fact, and it's way too narrow. So what? You had squash, tomatoes, and corn in your garden last year. What about that? Do you want to show us? That's what a thesis would be. It's the specific so what part. What are you going to show us about it? Why does it matter? Vegetable gardening can be a frustrating hobby. Is this a good thesis or a bad one? Yeah, now you're showing something very specific, your own personal slant on the gardening itself. So this is what makes this a good statement because it's reflecting a particular position. Now,